The old Craxian sat hunched in the corner of the dimly lit bar, his forearms wrapped around a glowing drink that cost more than most beings made in a week. His scales, once a vibrant purple that marked him as elite military, had faded to a dull gray. Scars crisscrossed his body like a map of forgotten battles, but the deepest wounds weren't visible. Commander Zekthor had fought in 37 campaigns across the galaxy. He'd faced the savage raptors of Kepler 442b, survived the mind-bending psychic assaults of the Etherian Collective, and even lived through a direct confrontation with a void Leviathan. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for humans. "You want to know about the Earth campaign?" Zekthor's voice was rough, like grinding stone. He didn't look up from his drink as the young soldiers crowded around his table. They were fresh recruits, their scales still bright, their eyes still holding that dangerous mixture of excitement and ignorance that marked those who'd never seen real combat. "We heard you were there," one of them said eagerly. "At the Battle of Mars. They say you commanded the entire Third Fleet." Zekthor finally looked up, his compound eyes reflecting the bar's neon lights. "I did. Started with 8,000 ships. Know how many made it back?" The recruits exchanged glances. "Half?" A bitter laugh escaped the veteran's throat. 43. 43 ships out of 8,000. The silence that followed was heavy. Someone dropped a glass across the bar, and several recruits flinched at the sound. Zekthor noticed and shook his head slowly. "Sit," he commanded. "If you really want to know about humans, sit and listen. But I warn you, what I'm about to tell you will change how you see the universe." The recruits scrambled for chairs, their earlier bravado evaporating. Zekthor took a long drink, gathering his thoughts. Where did one even begin to explain humanity? "The Galactic Council made a mistake," he began. "When they first discovered Earth, they saw a primitive species barely out of their atomic age. One planet, divided nations, still fighting among themselves with chemical rockets and nuclear weapons. The Council saw an easy target for expansion, another species to add to the tributary systems." He paused, his claws unconsciously tracing one of his deeper scars. "The first fleet sent to Earth was ceremonial. 500 ships, more than enough to subdue any pre-FTL civilization. They broadcast the standard surrender terms from orbit. Submit to the Galactic Council, provide resources and soldiers for the greater good, receive technology and protection in return. The same offer we'd made to 100 worlds before." "What happened?" asked the youngest recruit, barely past his first molting. "The humans said no." "They refused the Council?" another recruit gasped. "But that's suicide." Zekthor's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "That's what we thought." The fleet commander, Admiral Kretok, was so surprised he actually sent the message again, thinking there had been a translation error. The humans sent back a different message. 2 words in their dominant language: "Come try." The veteran finished his drink and signaled for another. Admiral Kretok was furious. He ordered an immediate demonstration of power. One ship descended toward their largest population center, intending to hover menacingly until they reconsidered. Standard intimidation tactics. And the ship never made it. The humans hit it with everything they had: primitive missiles, kinetic weapons, even their ancient chemical rockets. Most bounced off the shields, of course. But the humans kept firing. They threw everything at that ship, depleting military stockpiles that had taken them decades to build. And then Zekthor paused, his 4 hands clenching and unclenching. Then one of their missiles got through. A lucky shot, we thought. A 1 in a million chance that found a resonance frequency in our shields. The ship crashed in what they call the Pacific Ocean. No survivors. "So the Admiral retreated?" one recruit asked hopefully. "He should have," Zekthor said. "By all logic, he should have called for reinforcements, studied what had happened. But he was angry, humiliated. He ordered a full invasion. The old soldier's voice grew quieter, forcing the recruits to lean in. That's when we learned the first truth about humans. They don't just refuse to surrender, they get stronger when threatened. Within hours of our invasion announcement, their entire planet unified. Governments that had been enemies for generations suddenly stood side by side. Scientists who had competed now shared everything. Their factories, which had been making consumer goods, switched to weapons production overnight. But surely their primitive weapons couldn't match our technology, protested one recruit. You're right, Zekthor admitted. Their weapons were primitive. But humans have something more dangerous than technology. They have imagination, and they have spite. When their missiles wouldn't penetrate our shields, they didn't give up. They got creative. He leaned back, his tail twitching with remembered anxiety. They started ramming our landing craft with their aircraft. Suicide runs. When we adapted our shields to stop that, they switched tactics again. They'd overload their own nuclear reactors and launch them at us. When we started shooting those down, they buried nuclear weapons in their own cities and waited for us to land. They destroyed their own cities? The recruit's voice was horrified. 23 of them, Zekthor confirmed. They evacuated their people and turned their own homes into traps. Do you understand what I'm telling you? They sacrificed their own infrastructure, their own history, just to hurt us. And they did it with pride. They have a saying, if we can't have it, neither can you. The bar had grown quieter. Other patrons, some veterans themselves, had turned to listen. A Raptoran at the next table raised his drink in grim salute to Zekthor, his own scars telling of similar experiences. But that was just the beginning, Zekthor continued. The real horror came when we finally established footholds on their planet. That's when we discovered the second truth about humans. They don't just fight armies. Every single one of them fights. He gestured with his upper right arm. We landed in a region they call Texas. Our intelligence said it was populated by farmers and livestock handlers. Civilians, in other words, easy to control. He made that bitter, laughing sound again. The first patrol that went out came back with half their members missing. The survivors were traumatized, babbling about the ground itself attacking them. Turned out the humans had buried explosives along every road, hidden weapons in every building. Children, younglings no taller than my knee, were throwing incendiary devices at our vehicles. Children? One recruit whispered. They're elderly too, Zekthor added. I saw a human who must have been 90 of their years old. Could barely walk. She rolled a wheelchair full of explosives under one of our tanks and detonated it herself. Smiled as she did it. The veteran's words painted a picture that defied everything the recruits had been taught about warfare. In civilized combat, soldiers fought soldiers, civilians were protected, moved to safety zones. Infrastructure was preserved for the victor's use. But humans... They have a word, Zekthor said, guerrilla. It refers to a style of warfare where the weak fight the strong through ambush, sabotage, and attrition. But it's more than tactics with them. It's a philosophy. They believe that anyone who stands on their soil uninvited is a legitimate target. Soldier, medic, cook, engineer, doesn't matter. If you're there, you're the enemy. Surely they must have run out of fighters, one recruit said desperately. Or weapons. Or the will to continue. Zekthor fixed him with all four eyes. That brings us to the third truth about humans. They get more dangerous as they get more desperate. When we destroyed their military bases, they fought from their cities. When we leveled their cities, they fought from the forests and mountains. When we burned the forests, they fought from caves and tunnels. And when we thought we had them cornered, broken, beaten down to nothing, that's when they revealed what they'd been working on in those tunnels. He paused to order another drink, his voice growing hoarse from talking. The recruits waited, barely breathing, for him to continue. The tunnels, Zekthor continued after a long drink, stretched for thousands of their miles. While we'd been bombing their surface, they'd been digging. Not just hiding, you understand. Building. Creating underground factories, hospitals, entire communities. They'd learned to extract metals from the earth more efficiently than we'd ever seen. They were reverse engineering our crashed ships, our discarded weapons. A shudder ran through his massive frame. 6 months into the occupation, we started losing patrols. Entire units would just vanish. No distress signals, no bodies, nothing. We thought it was more of their guerrilla tactics until we found the first site. What site? The question came out as barely a whisper. One of our forward bases, built over what we thought was solid ground. One morning it was just gone. A perfectly circular hole 30 meters deep. The humans had dug beneath it, studied our architecture, calculated the exact points to compromise, and brought the entire structure down into the earth. 800 soldiers, buried alive. The recruits looked sick. One opened his mouth, perhaps to comment on the dishonor of such tactics, but Zekthor cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Don't," the veteran warned. "Don't talk to me about honor. Honor is a luxury for those who fight on equal terms. The humans were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing extinction. They did what they had to do. And that's the fourth truth about humans. They have no concept of a fair fight. There are only fights you win and fights you lose. They choose to win." "We tried to adapt," he continued. "Started using seismic sensors, deep ground scans, so they adapted too. Started using our own mining equipment against us, the tools we'd brought to extract Earth's resources. They'd steal them in raids, disappear into their tunnels, and weeks later our own equipment would breach our defenses from below." Zekthor's lower arms trembled slightly, whether from age or memory was unclear. But the tunnels were just the beginning. The real nightmare started when they began to understand our biology. "What do you mean?" asked a recruit, though his expression suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know. "Humans are terrifyingly adaptable," Zekthor explained. "Their home planet has every type of environment imaginable. Frozen wastelands, burning deserts, toxic swamps, high mountains where the air is thin, and humans live in all of them. They've evolved to handle temperature extremes that would kill most species, survive on minimal water, eat almost anything organic." He leaned forward conspiratorially. "But here's what Command never told you in training. Humans are natural chemists. Their entire history is filled with them finding new ways to poison each other. When they captured our dead, they didn't just study our weapons. They studied us, our biology, our weaknesses." The bar's atmosphere had grown oppressive. Several of the listening veterans had quietly left, unwilling to relive their own memories. But Zekthor pressed on, driven by some need to make these younglings understand. 3 months after the tunnel warfare started, a strange illness swept through our forces. Soldiers would wake up unable to breathe properly, their respiratory systems failing. Our medics were baffled. It wasn't any pathogen we could identify. Turned out the humans had developed a chemical compound that reacted with our blood chemistry. Harmless to them, deadly to us. They were putting it in our water supplies. "But how did they access our water?" a recruit asked. "Surely those were guarded." "Everything was guarded," Zekthor replied. "Didn't matter. Humans have this incredible ability to find the one weakness in any system. They had sympathizers among our slave species who helped them. They used their children to crawl through pipes too small for our sensors. They trained local animals to carry the poison. When we finally secured all water sources, they started releasing it as an aerosol during sandstorms." He noticed one recruit's scales had paled to an unhealthy shade. "Need a break?" he asked, not unkindly. The young soldier shook his head stubbornly. And Zekthor respected that. These stories were hard to hear, but necessary. The fifth truth about humans, he said, is that they remember everything, every slight, every loss, every fallen comrade, and they pay it all back with interest. We thought their emotional nature was a weakness. Turned out it was their greatest strength. A Craxian soldier fights because it's ordered. A human fights because they're angry, and they stay angry. I was promoted to commander after my predecessor was killed, Zekthor continued. Assassinated, actually, in his own quarters in the middle of our most secure base. The human who did it was a female, barely adult by their standards. She'd allowed herself to be captured 6 months earlier, endured interrogation, gained trust as a collaborator, all for the chance to get close enough to strike. Before security killed her, she looked right at me and said something in their language. I had it translated later. She said, "This is for Chicago." Chicago? One of the cities we destroyed early in the campaign. Turned out she'd lost her entire family there. 6 months of planning, of pretending, of waiting, just for revenge. And she was smiling when she died. Smiling because she knew she'd hurt us. Zekthor gestured for another drink. His story was reaching the parts that still gave him nightmares, but he'd come too far to stop now. By year 2 of the occupation, we controlled less territory than when we'd started. Every victory cost us more than we gained. The humans had stopped trying to protect their infrastructure and started using it against us. They'd blow up their own dams to flood our positions, burn their own crops to deny us resources, poison their own wells rather than let us use them. "The Council must have sent reinforcements," one recruit said hopefully. They did. The Second Fleet arrived with 15,000 ships, fresh troops, new equipment, updated tactics based on our reports. Zekthor's mandibles clicked. Want to know what happened to them? The recruits nodded mutely. The humans had been busy. While fighting us on the ground, they'd also been launching things into space, small objects, hard to detect. We thought they were trying to build escape vessels or communication satellites. We were wrong. They'd been launching weapons. Primitive, yes, but thousands of them. Millions. Just chunks of metal with simple guidance systems, waiting. When the Second Fleet entered orbit, the humans activated them all at once. Clouds of debris moving at orbital velocities, like flying into a meteor storm. Our shields could stop energy weapons, deflect missiles, but they weren't designed for millions of simple kinetic impacts. We lost a third of the fleet in the first hour. "A third?" someone gasped. "And that," Zekthor said grimly, "is when we learned the sixth truth about humans. They plan for the long war. Not just months or years, but generations. Those orbital weapons? They'd started launching them the day after we arrived. Every rocket they could build, every piece of scrap metal they could spare. They knew they couldn't match our technology, so they used the one advantage they had: time and determination." The veteran's voice took on a distant quality. "I met a human prisoner once, an engineer. I asked him how they could keep fighting when the odds were so hopeless. Know what he said? He said, 'My grandfather fought you. My father fought you. I fight you. And if necessary, my children will fight you.' We have a saying, 'The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants.'" Then he looked me right in the eye and asked, "How many generations are you willing to spend on this war?" "But we were winning," one recruit protested weakly. "We had to be winning." "Were we?" Zekthor challenged. "We controlled patches of land that required constant defense. We had supply lines that were under constant attack. Every soldier who died was a trained warrior from our home worlds, years of experience lost. Every human who died was replaced by 2 more who'd grown up hating us. They were getting better at fighting us. We were just getting tired." The Council understood this, eventually. After 3 years, they offered terms. Not surrender terms this time, negotiation. Recognition of Earth's sovereignty in exchange for an end to hostilities. The humans sent back one word: no. "They refused peace?" The recruit sounded shocked. "They refused our peace," Zekthor corrected. They demanded complete withdrawal, reparations for their dead, and technology transfers to ensure we could never threaten them again. The council was outraged. How dare a primitive species make demands? They ordered the Third Fleet, my fleet, to make a final push. Total war, no more occupation, just destruction. The old veteran fell silent for a long moment, lost in memories that clearly still haunted him. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. That's when they showed us what they'd really been working on in those tunnels. The Mars offensive was supposed to be our masterpiece, Zekthor said, his voice hollow. 8,000 ships converging on their red planet where they'd built their primary off-world military base. We knew they'd fortified it, but we had the numbers, the firepower. What could they do against an entire fleet? He laughed bitterly. We should have wondered why they let us see it, why they practically invited us to attack there instead of Earth. The humans had learned our psychology as well as we'd tried to learn theirs. They knew we'd want a decisive battle, a grand victory to break their spirit, so they gave us exactly what we wanted. It was a trap, one recruit stated, not asked. The entire planet was a trap, Zekthor confirmed, but not the kind we expected. When our fleet took position, when our ground forces landed, when we thought we had them cornered, they revealed their masterpiece. 3 years of tunnel digging hadn't just been for guerrilla warfare. They'd been mining Mars, the whole planet, every valuable mineral, every useful element extracted and processed in secret. He paused, gathering himself for the hardest part. But they hadn't built weapons with it, not conventional ones. They'd built engines, massive fusion engines, buried deep beneath Mars's surface. When they activated them, no, a recruit breathed. They didn't. They did. They moved the planet. Not far, just a few thousand kilometers, but enough to throw our entire fleet's navigation into chaos. Ships collided, formations scattered, and while we were trying to recover, they activated the second part of their plan. Zekthor's claws scraped against his glass. Remember those orbital weapons around Earth? They hadn't just launched them there. They'd been launching them throughout the solar system for 3 years. Millions of pieces of debris, all carefully calculated, all waiting. When Mars moved, it triggered a cascade. Orbital mechanics turned their entire solar system into a shooting gallery. But moving a planet, the energy required, would have taken us centuries to generate, Zekthor agreed. The humans did it in 3 years. Want to know how? They used our own power cores. Every ship they'd destroyed, every base they'd overrun, they'd salvaged the power systems. They'd reverse-engineered them, improved them, and networked them together. They used our own technology against us, but in a way we'd never imagined. The 7th truth about humans, he continued, is that they think bigger than anyone else. We saw planets as territory to control. They saw them as weapons to wield. We thought in terms of battles. They thought in terms of changing the fundamental architecture of their solar system. A heavy silence fell over the group. Finally, someone asked, how did anyone survive? Mars's movement created a gravity well that pulled many ships in. Others were destroyed by the debris fields. Some managed to retreat to what they thought was safe distance. Zekthor's scales shifted color slightly. That's when the humans revealed the final component. They'd turned their own sun into a weapon. Impossible, one recruit said flatly. I was there, Zekthor snapped. I saw it. Solar flares don't naturally form focused beams, but the humans had spent 3 years launching satellites into solar orbit. Tiny things, each one just a mirror and a magnetic field generator, individually worthless. Together they could direct and focus solar ejections. They turned their own star into the galaxy's largest plasma cannon. Our ship's shields were designed for weapons, not stellar phenomena. The focused solar flares overloaded them like tissue paper. In 6 hours, we lost over 90% of the Third Fleet. The 43 ships that survived were the ones far enough out to escape the worst of it, and we ran. We ran and didn't look back. The recruits sat in stunned silence. One finally managed, but surely after such losses, the council called off the invasion, Zekthor finished, agreed to every human demand, reparations, technology transfers, 100-light-year exclusion zone around their system. And you know what the really terrifying part is? The humans could have pursued us, could have used their new weapons to attack our worlds. They didn't. They let us go with a message. What message? This is what we did with 3 years and scavenged technology. Imagine what we can do with 30 years and proper resources. Don't come back. Zekthor drained his glass and stood, his old joints protesting. That's the final truth about humans, younglings. They don't just defeat you. They make sure you never want to try again. They turn defense into object lessons. They make examples that echo across the galaxy. But sir, one recruit said, surely they can't maintain such defenses forever. Surely someday. The veteran fixed him with a stare that could have melted steel. 40 years. It's been 40 years since the Earth War. Know what the humans have been doing? They took the technology we were forced to give them and improved it. They've colonized 6 systems. They've built fleets that make ours look antiquated. They've formed alliances with every species we ever conquered, offering them protection in exchange for trade. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. The Council keeps a permanent monitoring station at the edge of the exclusion zone. Know what the latest report says? The humans have started moving planets in their other systems too. They're building entire solar systems as defensive fortifications. They've turned warfare into stellar engineering. Why tell us this? One recruit asked quietly. Why break our spirits before we even begin? Break your spirits? Zekthor leaned on the table, bringing his scarred face close to theirs. I'm trying to save your lives. The Council will tell you humans are primitive, emotional, divided, all true. But they'll leave out the important parts. They won't tell you that humans get stronger under pressure. They won't tell you that they'd rather destroy their own worlds than let you have them. They won't tell you that they learn from every defeat and hold grudges for generations. He straightened up, preparing to leave. Most importantly, they won't tell you this. Humans don't fight wars the way we do. We fight to conquer. They fight to survive. And a species fighting for survival will do things that those fighting for glory would never imagine. As he walked toward the door, he turned back one last time. If you take anything from an old soldier's ramblings, take this. The galaxy is full of dangerous species. The void leviathans could swallow fleets. The Etherians could break your mind. The raptors could tear you apart. But humans will make you wish you'd never been born. Because they'll turn your own strengths against you, use your own technology better than you do, and they'll do it all while making you think you're winning. What happened to you after the retreat, sir? One recruit called out. Zekthor paused at the doorway. I was court-martialed, of course. Losing 99% of a fleet tends to end careers, but the humans did something unexpected. They specifically requested I be pardoned, said I was the only Craxian commander who'd shown adaptability. They wanted me alive to tell this story, to spread the word. Why? Because that's the darkest truth of all, Zekthor said. Humans don't just want to win. They want you to know you've lost. They want the entire galaxy to understand what happens when you threaten their home. I'm not just a survivor. I'm a warning. Every time I tell this story, every time someone sees my scars, it reinforces their message. Leave Earth alone. With that, the old veteran stepped out into the night, leaving behind a table of shaken recruits. They sat in silence for a long time, each lost in their own thoughts about the species they'd been taught to see as primitive. Finally, one of them spoke. Do you think he was exaggerating? Another pointed to a wall display showing recent galactic news. The headline read, Human colonial fleet exceeds 50,000 ships. Diplomatic Corps celebrates 15th species to join Earth Alliance. No, he said quietly. I don't think he was exaggerating at all. In the corner of the bar, an old Raptoran veteran raised his glass in a silent toast to the empty doorway. He'd been at Kepler 442b when the humans arrived as peacekeepers. He'd seen their primitive ground forces coordinate with devastating efficiency. He'd watched them turn a three-way civil war into a lasting peace through a mixture of diplomatic brilliance and implied threat. The bartender, a veteran himself, began closing down for the night. As he cleaned glasses, he hummed an old battle hymn from his service days. But tonight, it seemed more like a funeral dirge, because every veteran in that bar knew the truth. The age of conquest was over. The humans had ended it. Not through superior technology or greater numbers, but through something far more dangerous: the willingness to pay any price for freedom. And that, more than any weapon, was why the galaxy had learned to fear the small blue planet and its stubborn, impossible, terrifying inhabitants. In the distance, visible through the bar's window, a human trade vessel descended toward the spaceport. Its hull bore the seal of the Earth Alliance, a blue planet surrounded by stars with words in a dozen languages. But every species knew what the human version said. Touch one of us. Face all of us. The recruits filed out slowly, each carrying the weight of Zekthor's story. They'd entered the bar as eager young soldiers, ready to bring glory to the Craxian Empire. They left as something else, beings who understood that some victories cost more than any defeat. And somewhere in the night, Commander Zekthor made his way home, his duty fulfilled once again. The humans had spared him to be their herald, their prophet of deterrence, and he played his role perfectly because he knew something those recruits were only beginning to understand. The humans hadn't just won a war. They'd changed the very nature of warfare itself. And in doing so, they'd guaranteed their place in the galaxy not as subjects or conquests, but as the species everyone knew better than to fight. The dark truth about battling humans wasn't that they were unbeatable. It was that beating them would cost you everything you were fighting for in the first place. And in the cold mathematics of galactic politics, that made them the most dangerous species of all.